Today on the Andrew Cooperrider show, I used to have a little more hope for how things would go after this election, especially if Trump was going to win. That hope was kind of dashed last night when an interesting occurrence happened with myself and my wife at a local bar and a trivia operator getting very upset at me for existing. So we'll have that. Also, Michael Adams announces he's spending $250,000 in tax dollars to encourage early voting. We'll have a discussion regarding that spending. Good idea? Bad idea? I'll give you a hint. I think it's a bad idea. We'll dig into that and so much more today on the Andrew Cooperrider show. But before I dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Make sure you're sharing the show with others and leave a review if you're listening to this on a podcasting platform where you can leave a review. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So last night, my wife and I decided we wanted to go out for the evening, spend a little time together, a little time alone. And generally speaking, when we go out, we don't drink to get drunk or anything like that. We have a few drinks, but we look for a little bit of extra entertainment. And in this case, we consider sometimes going to karaoke bars or other things or open mic nights, but in this case we saw trivia was potentially going on at Campus Pub. I used to go there back in the day when I was younger, and while it's called Campus Pub, it's a little bit of a college bar, but not super. My experience has been more so recently when I've come like during the day or in the area. I've noticed that they're kind of an older crowd, kind of like people who went there in college that have kind of grown up are now going there more often. And so we went to go to the place. The place wasn't super packed. And when we walked into Campus Pub, there was, we could see that a guy was sitting behind like a mixer with a mic. That was clearly the trivia operator. So we turned towards him and I asked, hey, is trivia still going on? And at which point he didn't respond to that question. Instead, he asked me if I was Cooperrider. And, normally at this point, I'm going to be honest. At this point, those people who recognize me know exactly who I am. Generally, upon sight are people who are most often followers of the page, of the podcast, of the radio show that really know me on sight. Now, very few people on the far left will know me on sight still, but it's not very common that it's just not very common that I get a negative response when somebody asks that. It just hasn't been my experience. Occasionally, it's happened, and sometimes I've had some issues with people obviously knowing who I was and what my beliefs are and taking issue with them. But so I respond with, yes, I am. And at which point the trivia operator told me that I was a fascist. He informed me I was a fascist. And I asked him to clarify, make sure I understood what he says. Like, did you just call me a fascist? And he responded by saying, yes, you need to go out. Need to leave. And I said, I just want to play trivia. Can I play trivia? He's like, nope. And he did the, cut your throat kind of thing, like the nope. You can't. You need to go now. And I even asked him, I said, are you like a manager or something? Like, what's the deal? At which point he raised his arm up, acting like he was waving over people. He said, yes. He said, yeah, I am. And he raised his arm up, acting like he was waving over people. And then turned and forcibly said, out now, and pointed at the door. And I thought about maybe arguing the point. It seems kind of, maybe he is the manager. I figured he worked for Campus Pub, but he was just like a frontline worker or something like that, or a guy coming in to volunteer. Maybe he was the manager. I will say he didn't seem drunk. I did notice, though, he had a beer in front of him. So that tells me that maybe he was, maybe a little lit, right? We'll return to that. And the fact that he was drinking made me think, well, maybe he's an off-duty manager that's just coming in to volunteer to do trivia. But he was very sure and certain that he could kick me out. There was no doubt in his mind that he was allowed to do that on his own. And obviously he's in a position of authority, kind of representing the business. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to sit here arguing with somebody. I came in here to do trivia, and I'm not going to go deal with a guy who clearly hates me doing trivia. I'll just leave. And so we left. We went to another dive bar, kind of closer to our house, and had a few beers. And when I was there, I wrote a post explaining what had happened, that Campus Pub had decided to go ahead and kick me out and refuse me service. Now, obviously, anytime this happens, these kinds of things happen, businesses have a few choices. And so when I made my post on social media, and let me rewind too, because when the guy told me I was a fascist, and I said, did you just call me a fascist? He said, yeah, I see what you post on social media. You're a fascist. So he was aware of the social media thing. And I only bring that up because it's very curious to me, and this is where I start wondering what is happening in our country. Because let's just say from a business standpoint, okay? If you're a business owner or an employee of a business, generally speaking, and you're not working somewhere, especially in the service industry, like, let's say like 3rd Street stuff in Lexington, okay? So 3rd Street stuff in Lexington, for those who are unaware, of course, they've got every single gay flag you can think of hung out front, Black Lives Matter flags hung up front. Like, it's clear you are a liberal establishment. And so a place like that denying me service makes a lot of sense. It's on brand for them. They are identifying themselves as a place for liberals. That's a part of their business plan. And that's fine. That's a fine decision to make as a business. And if another business wants to hang up a Trump 2024 flag and identify them as a conservative business and make that a part of their brand, then that is their decision to do so. Now, it seemed odd to me that Campus Pub would make it a part of their brand to kick out conservatives, because Campus Pub, generally, as I mentioned earlier, is frequented by blue-collar workers. And chances are, if you go into your average dive bar that isn't full of college students, chances are, even in somewhere like Lexington, that there's a pretty high conservative rate within the dive bar. You know, generally speaking, let's just be honest here, liberals tend to make a little bit more money. And when they go out, they're going out to the breweries or the distillery district and buying $13 cocktails at some place that has $10,000 chandeliers. You know, the hardworking blue-collar conservatives that are mainly conservative now, especially in Kentucky, blue-collar workers, do go to places where they can get cheap beer, cheap drinks, and enjoy time with friends, because they're not as interested in paying for a fancy atmosphere because, well, they don't have the extra money to spend. Hence why they support Trump so much, is because, well, they don't have that extra money in part right now due to inflation, and it's really hurting them. You know, not to digress too much, but this is why the liberals don't understand why conservatives, Republicans, and the blue-collar workers are saying life is so hard right now, is because they have not had to give up much. Their lives are not worse because they're well off, they're wealthy, they're fine. Compared to, well, the blue-collar worker, you know, the fact that milk goes from $2 to $3 a gallon, or gas or eggs or anything else goes up 20, 30, 40% in price, they feel that. They have families. That hits their bottom line. They budget dollar for dollar. They're budgeting everything coming into their household. And they're the people who seek out, you know, hey, look, if I want to go out and have fun, I'm trying to spend like 20, 30 bucks because I don't have a lot of extra income. I'm going to go to a cheaper dive bar. And hey, if they've got some trivia going on, maybe I can go there and have a little bit of fun. So that's why it seemed odd decision, because while Campus Pub's business model is not one to be conservative or liberal, which means you would want to be agnostic when it comes to politics. You just want to stay out of it. You naturally, because of the type of place you have, are attracting in conservatives. So it does seem odd that they would actively think that, oh, somebody's a conservative, we can kick them out. Because here's the other thing, too. That nothing I say is really that far outside the bounds of what a standard, normal conservative generally thinks. In fact, the individual who kicked me out, and I don't want to get too ahead of the story here, but the individual who kicked me out was actually commenting elsewhere or on Campus Pub's Facebook page, talking about why he kicked me out. And he confirmed he did call me a fascist. And he said I was a fascist because he was asked by somebody, like, why is he a fascist? And he responded with that I was a fascist because, one, I played it fast and loose during COVID. Now, what's crazy is that when you look at polling, almost 70%, if not more, of Americans agree that COVID was mishandled, that we went too far in our shutdowns with COVID. So the majority of people within that room, knowing what they know now, and especially because they're at a bar, and probably you would think the owners of bars would agree with what I did during COVID. Another thing he pointed at was that recently I had called out a taxpayer-funded drag show for being a taxpayer-funded drag show. And and he had called that out because he said, well, that means he's a fascist, because he said he didn't want taxpayer funds funding a drag show and kids at drag shows. That's it. Now, would the average, not just conservative, but average person, generally speaking, agree with that, especially the average person inside a dive bar? If you think I walked into a dive bar and said, let's have kids at drag shows, they would agree with that statement or disagree? Do you think if I walked into a drag bar and I said, hey, let's use tax dollars to fund drag shows, you think they would generally agree or disagree with that statement inside a dive bar? Of course, they're generally going to disagree, right? And so when he's calling me fascist for the statements that he takes issues with, that is the opinions held by pretty much all conservatives, Republicans, certainly people who are voting for Trump, generally speaking, would agree. I would be struggling to find somebody who's voting for Trump that is a conservative or Republican that thinks that taxpayer dollars should be funding drag shows, or that we didn't do too much as far as lockdowns go on the local level, because remember, it was decided at the state levels when it came to COVID that we didn't do enough. We should lock down more, and those who fought it are bad people. You're not going to find that. And so that's why it's interesting to tell a person who has a general, just conservative beliefs, you're not welcome here because of the posts you make on social media. And so I posted about it, and, within about an hour or two, and I was not awake when the post started coming in, because obviously I have work to do the next day and everything else. I wasn't going to be up all night. I was just looking to kill about an hour or so, and, I had a few drinks, went home. And so by the time I woke up in the morning, I saw that Campus Pub had responded, and they had clarified what had happened. So what had exactly occurred was that Campus Pub hires a company called Live Action Trivia to operate their trivia nights. Then Live Action Trivia, the guy who kicked me out, was employed by Live Action Trivia. Now, I bring this up as an important point because there's some people and some statements people have made that they're acting like it was just a random guy. The liberals especially that are coming on to defend the actions. A lot of them, I'm seeing a few liberal comments saying, like, it's good that he kicked me out. He should kick me out. And I'll get into some of their arguments here in a bit. But, so it's good that it happened. Some will say it didn't happen, and then obviously, when posts came in from the business confirming somebody really did kick me out of their business, that didn't exactly go well for those who claim that this never happened, even though the company's copped to it, that it did happen. But it is interesting that some people would claim that the statements I was kicked out by what I thought was an employee is just outwardly false, which isn't accurate. It's not like I was kicked out by some random patron that walked up to me and said, I don't like your viewpoints, get out of here, right? Not like that at all. No, this was an individual who was being compensated in one form or another to be there. He's an employee of a company doing a job. So it's pretty reasonable that somebody would think that they work for the business. I asked him if he was the manager, and he said he was. And then he waved over people to help kick me out. So yeah, I would make some assumptions, wouldn't you? So, of course, though, I want to be fair. So I did clarify. I said, look, it wasn't Campus Pub itself. It was Live Action Trivia who did it. Now, Live Action Trivia also apologized and said that they fired the individual who apparently has worked for them for years. They fired this individual for going, as they called it, rogue, and for kicking somebody out of a business that they don't even operate, for kicking somebody out of business at a bar, and said, look, we're sorry that this happened. And so the fact that they responded that way, obviously I'm not going to call on anybody to boycott Campus Pub or Live Action Trivia at this point. There's no reason to, right? That doesn't represent their values. They had an employee that went a little crazy. The only thing they did wrong, and I have to point this out, and something they should look at within their policies to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again, is to serve a person alcohol who's performing a job on site. If somebody's doing a musical performance, for an example, I guess it makes sense. You give them some booze and stuff, especially when they're done. After they've performed, they're not exactly, especially after they've performed, that's part of the performance. They're not doing a, quote unquote, you'd call it a professional job or what have you. But if you're operating trivia nights and you're going to be interacting with customers on a customer service basis, making sure you represent both Live Action Trivia and the business you're in accurately and without incident, maybe you shouldn't be drinking while on the job. Just an idea, just a thought process. Don't drink while on the job unless you're like a rock star or something, I guess. That would be my piece of advice here. But I think it does point to, I think we're in some trouble as a nation in general when these kinds of things occur. And they don't just happen to me. I've heard stories, had people tell me about stories where they are being kicked out of places for wearing Trump things or Trump hats or Trump shirts, anything that identifies them as a Trump voter. They get treated badly. I've have people that are legislator friends of mine that at corporate banks, even they'll be banking at corporate banks, and tellers at those banks will be calling them slime and scum, despite the fact they do business with them. And so that kind of behavior, this is what I was hoping, because I see the division in the country, I do. And people say, the left would say that we, and me, because I do a show and post online, foment that divisiveness. We're causing it. We're a problem, right? In fact, they'll point to one of the leftists on the post there commenting, pointed to the fact that I called out the left for continuing to sue the same cake baker in Colorado because he won't do gay wedding cakes and he won't do he wouldn't do a gender transition cake. And so they continue to sue him for discrimination, trying to ruin him financially, even if they don't succeed in court. And they say, well, so you don't believe in discrimination of any kind, or you don't believe in property rights, apparently, because, I thought people said, oh, you can do whatever you want with your business. 100%. Do whatever you want with your business. That cake baker should be allowed to deny service to whoever they want to. And Campus Pub, if they decided to, should be able to deny service to me as well. I'm not asking my government to get involved in forcing Campus Pub to sell me a beer or forcing a cake baker to bake a cake for someone they don't want to. That's the left running to the government for lawsuits. That's the left running to try to use lawfare to ruin a business. That's the left. And why do they do that? Because the general populace wouldn't back them up. They wouldn't be able to hurt a person's business otherwise. However, I do believe in the same way that if Campus Pub had decided, if it was now part of their thing that they just kick out conservatives, they just don't particularly like them and they'll kick them out, if that was their thought process, if they're not going to clearly indicate they hate conservatives, and they could do that by, like I said, hanging up a Democrat flags or BLM flags or whatever, like Third Street stuff does. So then I can decide, oh, okay, I don't want to take my money there. And if they're not going to clearly identify themselves that way, well, then absolutely I have a right to complain about it because I want, not just complain, but to post about it, inform others about it, because I want other conservatives to know. In the same way you're free to discriminate against whoever you want to, I'm free to tell others about it. And you can experience, you have the freedom in this country to speak. You have the freedom in this country to speak, and should have the freedom to run your business how you want to. And that means that I believe the regulation against discrimination is freedom of speech. The regulation against why you don't discriminate against people isn't because the government needs to pass a law. It isn't even lawsuits. It's that, hey, if you discriminate against this group of people, they can tell others about it, and then that may hurt your business. And if it hurts your business, then that's on you. That was your decision. You may. And there's a fine line there. And I've mentioned this before on the show, that there's a fine line between asking my government to do something and then just having an opinion about it. For an example, I, as a Christian, believe homosexuality is wrong. I, as a Christian, believe same-sex couplings are wrong. But that doesn't mean that I want my government now to come in and arrest people for being in same-sex relationships. Now, okaying them through, marriage and everything else, I have other questions about, mainly, what's government's interest in marriage if it's not about procreation, but putting gay marriage to the side, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, I do not want my government to arrest somebody just simply for being gay. I may disagree with their lifestyle, but that's a difference between why my government involved. But this is something the left, they don't see a difference of. It's impossible for them to see it. This isn't the first time I've run into it. Anytime they have a viewpoint, their natural inclination is government must enforce my viewpoint. It's the same thing about book banning. To them, saying that government tax dollars shouldn't pay for this book is the same thing as banning that book from existing and people being able to buy it. They do not differentiate something between government and personal beliefs. Their only solution to everything is government. That's why they have such a problem with those of us who want smaller government. Those of us who want less spending. Because they're not able to solve the problems that they want to solve because they don't know how to solve them without using the government. The idea of doing so, it just doesn't cross their mind. They can't even contemplate it. So anyways, I bring that up. Going back to what I was saying about worrying about the future of our country here. So I used to think that if Kamala Harris wins, if they do remove the filibuster and pack the courts and make Puerto Rico a new state, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble as a country. Because what would end up happening by doing that is, despite the fact that, let's say, 48% of the people would disagree with them, they're able to basically move forward their agendas. And since everybody's default is Democrat, well, not everybody, but the majority of people's default is Democrat, and they have more Democrat senators and congressmen, and that it's nearly impossible for Republicans to win back a majority, what they end up going to and having to deal with is their base, Democrats. So it's about how far left and crazy can we go? And I think you would see things like banning of free speech and platforms and more weaponization of government because Democrats don't want to give up their power, especially, too, if it's close. They're going to be like, look, that was way too close, and Trump was literally Hitler. We have to do something so this doesn't happen again. That would be their thought process. Now, if Trump won, what I was hoping was that maybe Democrats would have a moment of realization of saying, look, maybe we're going a little too far here. maybe we're a little too crazy. Maybe our economic policies aren't working. Our social policies are not good. The majority of people disagree with how crazy we are. We need to make a difference. I used to think that's the direction we could go. But I think we're dealing with a crisis of purpose now with so many in this country. Take, for example, the guy who kicked me out of Campus Pub, who's working for Live Action Trivia, that no longer works for Live Action Trivia, that was fired. To him, kicking out a local activist on Facebook and Twitter, and that does some activist things, works on a few campaigns, but has literally, I don't know, maybe 10,000 followers across all platforms and gets maybe a few thousand listens to a show. Definitely not a major player in the grand scheme of things. At the state level, sure, but at the grand scheme of things really doesn't matter. But to him, his purpose in life was to advocate for his political viewpoints. It wasn't to have a job or to help out a business or anything else. He wasn't finding purpose anywhere else. So to him, risking his job, risking other people's businesses, it was worth it to him to kick somebody out. And he knew it was a risk because he knew me through social media. You know this individual, me in this case, has reach, has the ability to spread a message, at least locally, because you've seen it before. So why would he do it? Why would he risk all that, knowing he was risking it, knowing that information would get out? Because he has no other purpose. We're having a crisis of faith. He doesn't find any value in other things, in a family, in his faith. There's nothing there for him to grasp onto. All he has is politics. All he has is politics, and he has to find deeper meaning in it. It has to be life or death. You know, for us Christians, our faith, that's life or death. We're willing to die for our faith, or should be. Because our faith teaches us about life and death. Regardless if you're a Christian or some other viewpoint, your faith is teaching you about life or death. But when you don't have that, the vast majority of people need to find something else, deeper purpose in their lives, and they're going to find politics. But if politics is going to have the same deep purpose that religion has, well, then it's going to have to be something you're willing to live and die over. And that's my concern. Is that there's a whole lot of people out here with not a whole lot of purpose. That all they have is their hate for Trump or hate for conservatives or hate for Republicans. That's it. That is the most important thing in their lives. And that becomes their life or death reasons. And that will lead to violence. Now, Michael Adams, now I have a little bit, I guess, less personal heavy of a subject. Michael Adams has released recently a press release saying he's spending $250,000 of taxpayer funds on an early vote, get out the vote campaign. Now, he says that he's doing this because I think his main concern is he's worried about election day lines because of massive turnout, and then they've switched over to these election centers, which lead to massive lines because you're going from, like, you know, in some counties, 20 voting places to like 5. So all 20 voting places worth of people go to one place. Or you know, all 20 go to, 5 places. And so you get overwhelmed. And part of the reason why they do this, they say, is because it's better for staffing. But that means that you have the same amount of staff as you had at one, now handling 4 or 5 times the amount of people. Hence part of the reason of the slowdown. So he's hoping, hey, if you can get out there and vote earlier, that'd be great. And that's worth me spending $250,000 on. That's what he says. But I think we need to pause here and have a real discussion about some of these things we see governments doing in order to encourage early voting. In order to encourage voting at all. It is always interesting to me when I see government spending money on encouraging people to vote. Because in reality, what actual business or reasoning is it of governments to spend money encouraging people to vote? They should spend money facilitating elections, and they do. But to government actors, to the government, it shouldn't matter how many people show up to vote or not. In all actuality, it shouldn't matter how many people vote. That shouldn't be important to you. You should just be concerned that the election happens and you count the votes accurately and the election happens following the laws. That should be it. But this concern about getting more people voting or early voting, I think, has in large part is to deal with the politics of it. If you believe that if more people vote, you do better, your preferred people do better, then you'll spend money, taxpayer dollars, encouraging more people to vote, pretending it's not a campaign finance expenditure, when it clearly is a get out the vote campaign. And we see at the federal level, governments doing this as well. But let's go to Michael Adams's claim or his thought process that's about, well, these vote centers, we don't want them to get overwhelmed. Maybe you should switch back to doing precinct voting. We've seen tons of problems with these vote centers. I know in several counties, a big problem has been the wrong ballots. Because priorly, you only had the ballots for the precincts you were servicing. If you had 20 voting centers, let's say each voting place was servicing 2 precincts, you only had like 2 different ballots. That was it. But now, you'll take a place, a county that has 100 different ballot variations because you have, of course, county magistrate seats, state house seats, state senate seats, city council seats that can be cut up. You know, whether you're in the city, mayor, out of the city, no mayor, out in a different city, another mayor, right? You see what I'm saying? School board. And not all of them fall along the same line. So somebody could have the same school board, but could have a different state house rep. Somebody could have the same school board, but one's in the city and out of the city. So you have city council races and mayor races on one and you don't on the other. These are all options that happen on the ballot. And those ballot variations and forcing each place to carry them has created confusion where people get the wrong ballots. And when you get the wrong ballots, it's going to favor the incumbents. Because the way you challenge individuals who don't have name ID, the way they challenge people who already do, is they go out and they knock the doors in the district. But if people are voting that they never knocked the doors on, they never sent a mailer to, they never campaigned to, they're going to end up voting for whose name they recognize. And generally speaking, the person who's been in there the longest is the name they most recognize. Because it's just through casual conversation. Because they didn't get campaigned to. And so that's an issue. And then you go into the issue of having this early voting. I've talked about it before on the show, but early voting in Kentucky is not constitutional. These 3 days of early absentee, no excuse absentee in-person voting, that's what they call it, and they have to call it that because if they called it just early voting, it would be unconstitutional because our Constitution's clear. We are to vote in person 1 day unless otherwise prescribed for absentee-type balloting. And so they have to cook up a new term to make it work. Literally making up terms to violate the Constitution. And I think that's the kind of election integrity conversations we need to have in the long term. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank y'all so much for joining me. We'll be back here probably tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.